Did people really go through their entire lives in medieval times caked in grime? Did medieval women from the 5th to the 15th century truly reek so much that they needed buckets of perfume just to stand near another human being? These stories you have heard might paint a very misleading picture. Number 1, medieval women died young due to rampant disease caused by poor hygiene. The idea that medieval women perished early solely because of a lack of cleanliness paints an incomplete picture of a complex world. Life in the medieval period, spanning from roughly 500 to 1500 Common Era, was indeed challenging, and lifespans were shorter on average than today, but this was due to a multitude of factors, not just a perceived absence of hygiene practices. People faced the constant threat of famine, which weakened bodies and made them susceptible to illness. A poor harvest could decimate a population, not just through starvation, but by making everyone less able to fight off common infections. Warfare was also a perpetual reality. Raids, sieges, and pitched battles took countless lives, directly and indirectly, through the disruption of agriculture and the spread of disease among displaced populations. Injuries from conflict were often fatal, even minor ones, given the limited medical knowledge of the time regarding wound care and infection. Specific infectious diseases, such as the bubonic plague, known as the Black Death, swept across continents with devastating force. The plague, a bacterial infection spread primarily by fleas on rats, caused immense mortality, sometimes wiping out a third or even half of a regional population in a single outbreak. Its transmission was not primarily linked to individual hygiene habits in the way we understand them today, but rather to the movement of rats and people, and the density of urban living. Other diseases, like smallpox, measles, and dysentery, were also common and lethal. These illnesses often spread regardless of how often a person washed or how clean their immediate surroundings were, because the understanding of germ theory simply did not exist. People did not know about microscopic pathogens. Despite this lack of germ theory, medieval communities and individuals made efforts to manage waste and maintain some level of cleanliness, understanding that filth could contribute to illness. Town councils, for instance, sometimes issued ordinances about waste disposal. They understood that stagnant water in piles of refuse smelled bad and seemed to correlate with sickness, even if the precise mechanism was unknown. Some cities appointed officials whose job it was to oversee street cleaning and ensure that waste was removed from public areas. Latrines and privies, while basic by modern standards, were designed to separate human waste from living spaces. Cesspits were dug and regularly emptied, though the contents were often then used as fertilizer, a practice that, while practical, could also contribute to the spread of parasites. Efforts were also made in times of epidemic. When the plague struck, communities sometimes implemented measures that resembled what we now call quarantine. Ships arriving in port were held for a period of time, often 40 days, before passengers and crew were allowed to disembark. Houses where infected people lived were sometimes marked or sealed off. While these measures were crude and not always effective, they demonstrate a conscious attempt to prevent the spread of disease based on observation, not just resignation to fate. People understood contagion, even if they did not understand its root cause. They would avoid those who were clearly sick and dispose of the belongings of the deceased. The average lifespan in the medieval period was indeed lower than today, often cited as being in the 30s or 40s. However, this average is heavily skewed by high infant and child mortality rates. Many children did not survive past their 5th birthday, succumbing to childhood diseases, malnutrition, or accidents. If a person survived past childhood, their chances of living into their 50s, 60s, or even older significantly increased. There are numerous historical records of individuals, both men and women, living to advanced ages. The causes of death for adults were diverse, including complications from childbirth for women, injuries, and a wide array of infections that medicine was ill-equipped to treat. While personal hygiene was certainly a factor in health, it was one among many. Nutrition, exposure to violence, access to clean drinking water, and the overall prevalence of infectious diseases played a much larger role in determining how long medieval people, including women, lived. The idea that their lives were simply cut short because they were inherently dirty ignores the profound challenges of their environment and the state of medical knowledge at the time. They did what they could with the understanding they had, striving for cleanliness, often for comfort, religious observance, and social standing, not just as a desperate measure against disease. Number 2, medieval women had no access to soap or washing agents. The notion that medieval women lacked access to soap or any form of washing agent simply does not align with historical evidence. Soap was not a new invention in the medieval period. Its existence and use predated it by centuries. While perhaps not mass-produced in the way it is today, soap was certainly known and produced in various forms throughout the medieval era. It was made by combining animal fats or vegetable oils with lye, which is a strong alkaline solution derived from wood ash. This process, known as saponification, creates a basic form of soap. Different regions and social classes would have produced and used different qualities and types of soap. In many households, soap was a domestic product. Women, as part of their household duties, would have been involved in its creation. They collected wood ash from fires, leached water through it to create lye, and then combined this lye with animal fats, such as tallow from slaughtered livestock, or vegetable oils if available. This mixture would be boiled, often for hours, until it thickened and solidified into a usable soap. The resulting product might have been harsh by modern standards, but it was effective for cleaning clothes, hands, and bodies. Records from monasteries and large estates often mention soap production, indicating it was a recognized and necessary commodity. Beyond individual household production, there were also specialized soap makers in urban centers. These artisans would produce soap for sale, often using more refined techniques and perhaps incorporating scented herbs or oils. For example, olive oil was a common base for soap in Mediterranean regions, leading to a higher quality product similar to what we might recognize as Castile soap. The use of fuller's earth, a type of clay, was also prevalent. While not soap, it was used as a cleaning agent, particularly for washing wool and textiles. Fullers, who processed cloth, would use fuller's earth to absorb grease and dirt from wool, demonstrating an understanding of effective cleaning agents beyond mere water. The demand for soap and other washing agents was driven not only by personal hygiene, but also by the needs of the textile industry. Wool, a primary material for clothing and blankets, required thorough cleaning during its processing. Fulling, the process of cleaning and thickening wool, often involved the use of lye or soap to remove lanolin and dirt. This large-scale industrial use of soap further proves its widespread availability and the knowledge of its chemical properties. Monastic communities known for their emphasis on cleanliness and order also had well-established practices for laundry and personal washing, often involving soap. Some medical texts and household manuals from the period also sometimes mention soap or lye as ingredients for various washes and poultices, indicating their recognition as cleaning and even antiseptic agents. For example, a wound might be washed with a lye solution, or a person suffering from skin ailments might be advised to bathe in water containing soap or cleansing herbs. Even if the exact science was not understood, the practical benefits of these substances for removing dirt and grease were clearly observed. The idea that medieval people, and particularly women, lived in a world devoid of soap is a misconception. From humble homemade batches produced in the countryside to more specialized varieties sold in towns, soap was present. Its presence highlights that washing was not just a rare luxury, but a practical aspect of daily life, both for personal cleanliness and for maintaining clothing and other textiles. Medieval women were quite familiar with the methods and materials needed to keep themselves and their households clean, utilizing the resources available to them in a resourceful and often ingenious manner. They understood that dirt needed to be removed, and they had the tools to do so. Number 3. Medieval women lived in filth and unhygienic conditions constantly. The pervasive image of medieval life as one of unrelenting squalor and filth, particularly for women, simply does not hold up to scrutiny against historical evidence. While medieval sanitation certainly differed from modern standards, people, including women, actively engaged in practices to maintain cleanliness in their homes, persons, and communities. The degree of cleanliness varied greatly depending on social class, location, and individual habits, but a constant state of filth was far from universal. Within the home, medieval women, as primary managers of the household, undertook daily and weekly cleaning chores. Floors, often made of packed earth or wood, were swept regularly to remove dust, dirt, and food scraps. Rushes were often spread on floors in wealthier homes, and while they might seem unhygienic by modern standards, they were regularly replaced, and the old rushes, along with any accumulated debris, were removed. The walls were sometimes whitewashed, and textiles like tapestries and bed linens were aired out and washed when possible. On windows, though often small and unglazed in earlier periods, were open to allow fresh air to circulate, a practice understood to remove stale odors. Waste disposal was a key aspect of medieval hygiene. In towns and castles, privies or latrines were common. These were often simple wooden structures built over cesspits, which were dug deep into the ground. While not flushed with water in the modern sense, these pits were periodically emptied by gong farmers or night soil collectors, and the contents were often taken away to be used as fertilizer for fields outside the city walls. This system, though basic, was a deliberate effort to manage human waste away from living spaces. In more rural areas, people might use outdoor privies or simply dispose of human waste in middens, which were waste heaps located away from the immediate dwelling. Towns also made efforts to manage public waste. Streets were often swept, though less effectively than today, and ordinances were sometimes enacted to prevent people from simply dumping refuse directly onto the thoroughfares. Guilds and municipal authorities often regulated trades that produced a lot of waste, such as butchers, tanners, and fishmongers, requiring them to dispose of their waste in designated areas or to remove it from the town entirely. Rivers and streams, while used for water, were also unfortunately used for waste disposal in many places, which led to issues, but efforts were also made to ensure cleaner water sources for drinking and cooking. Wells were carefully maintained and protected from contamination in many communities. Baths and washing facilities were also present. While large public bathhouses were more common in the early medieval period and declined in popularity in some regions, after the Black Death due to fears of disease transmission, private bathing was still practiced. Wealthier households had dedicated bathing chambers or portable wooden tubs that could be filled with heated water. Even in simpler homes, a large wooden tub filled with water heated over the fire allowed for family members to bathe. The water might be shared, but the act of washing was deliberate. Cleanliness was often associated with piety and social status. Religious texts sometimes emphasized the importance of ritual cleansing, and appearing clean was a sign of respect and dignity, particularly for women in public life. Clothing hygiene was also considered. Clothes were regularly shaken out, brushed, and aired. This laundering was a laborious task, often performed in rivers or streams or large communal washhouses using lye or soap. While not every garment was washed daily, undergarments were changed more frequently, and outer garments were cleaned as needed. The idea of living in perpetually unwashed clothing for years is a dramatic exaggeration. Medieval women were resourceful and dedicated to managing their households, which included significant efforts to maintain a reasonable standard of cleanliness given the technology and resources available to them. Their understanding of hygiene was empirical, based on what they observed made them feel better and what was socially acceptable. Number 4, medieval women did not have periods or manage them in any way. The notion that medieval women somehow did not experience menstruation or that they simply ignored it is entirely false and quite absurd. Menstruation is a fundamental biological process for most women of reproductive age, and medieval women were no exception. They certainly had periods, and like women in every era, they needed to manage them. While the specific methods and materials differed from modern disposable products, medieval women employed practical and effective ways to handle their menstrual flow. Historical evidence, though often indirect due to the private nature of the topic, points to the use of absorbent cloths or rags. These were typically made from linen or wool, materials readily available in medieval households. Women would fashion these into pads or simply use folded cloths to absorb the flow. These cloths were reusable, washed, and dried after each use. This practice was not unique to the medieval period. Variations of reusable menstrual cloths have been used by women across cultures for millennia. The specific size, shape, and thickness of these cloths would have varied according to individual needs and preferences. Managing menstruation also involved an understanding of one's body and flow. Medieval women were likely intimately familiar with their cycles, even if the biological mechanisms were not fully understood. Medical texts from the period, though often based on humoral theory, discuss menstruation, sometimes referring to it as a purging or a natural process essential for a woman's health. While some texts might advise certain behaviors during menstruation, they rarely suggest that it was ignored or hidden in a way that implies a complete lack of management. Instead, they sometimes speak of specific dietary recommendations or activities to avoid during this time, indicating an awareness and accommodation of the monthly cycle. Privacy was also a consideration. While medieval homes might seem less private by modern standards, women still had personal spaces and ways to manage their needs discreetly. The garments were often layered, and the absorbent cloths would have been worn beneath outer clothing. The washing and drying of these cloths would have been part of regular household laundry routines, perhaps done in conjunction with other items or in secluded areas. Women also had extensive social networks within their communities, and knowledge about such practical matters would have been passed down from mother to daughter, or among female friends and relatives. Their archaeological finds, though rare for such ephemeral items, sometimes provide clues. Excavations of latrines or cesspits have occasionally yielded remnants of textiles that could have served as menstrual cloths. While not definitive proof for every woman, these findings corroborate the idea that fabric was indeed used for personal hygiene needs. Furthermore, there are no widespread historical accounts or medical treatises suggesting that medieval women experienced severe infections or discomfort because they simply let menstrual blood flow freely without any absorption or management. Such a situation would have been incredibly unhygienic, uncomfortable, and socially unacceptable even then. The idea that medieval women were so disconnected from their bodies or so devoid of practical knowledge that they did not manage menstruation reflects a modern bias rather than historical reality. They were pragmatic and resourceful, utilizing the materials available to them to address a basic biological need. Their methods were different from ours, but they were effective and allowed them to continue their daily lives with a degree of comfort and cleanliness. The absence of tampons or disposable pads does not mean an absence of menstrual care. Number 5, medieval women used strong perfumes to cover body odor because they were so dirty. The idea that medieval women relied on powerful perfumes solely to mask an overwhelming stench of unwashed bodies is a simplification that ignores the complex reality of medieval hygiene and cultural practices. While personal hygiene standards and practices differed significantly from today, and body odor was undoubtedly more common in an era without daily showers and antiperspirants, the use of perfumes and scents was much more nuanced and served multiple purposes beyond mere concealment. Perfumes, scented waters, and fragrant herbs were indeed used in the medieval period, but their application often signified status, pleasure, and even perceived health benefits, rather than just a desperate attempt to cover up dirt. Wealthy individuals, both men and women, would acquire or commission perfumes made from rare and expensive ingredients like musk, ambergris, civet, and imported spices such as cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg. These substances were costly and reflected the wearer's affluence and refinement. Applying such scents was an act of luxury, akin to wearing fine jewelry or clothing, rather than a necessity to counteract extreme filth. Floral waters distilled from roses, orange blossoms, or lavender were also popular. These were often used for washing hands and faces, as well as for rinsing laundry, adding a subtle, pleasant aroma to both person and textiles. A woman might use rose water to refresh her face, or to rinse her hair after washing, not just to mask an odor, but to feel clean and refreshed. These were far from the overpowering, heavy perfumes often imagined as being used to hide strong body odor. They were lighter, more natural scents. Furthermore, medieval people understood the importance of fresh air and aired clothing. Clothes were often shaken out, brushed, and hung outdoors to air, especially after being worn or stored. Linens, both for the body and for the bed, were laundered using lye or soap and often dried in the sun, which naturally disinfected and refreshed them. The scent of clean linen, rather than heavy perfume, was a sign of a well-kept household. People understood that fresh air helped dissipate unpleasant smells. Herbs and pomanders were also widely used. Women carried small pouches or decorative balls called pomanders, filled with fragrant herbs, spices, or resins. These were not solely for masking body odor. They were believed to ward off disease, purify the air, or simply provide a pleasant aroma for the wearer and those nearby. A medieval woman might hold a pomander to her nose when walking through a crowded street or market, where many unpleasant smells were unavoidable, or when visiting a sick person, believing the scent offered protection. The use of sweet-smelling herbs was common in homes. Strewn on floors or placed in sachets among clothes, these herbs contributed to a generally more pleasant indoor environment. They provided a sense of freshness and deterred pests. Consider also the social rituals. While some social interactions might have been less formal than today, appearing presentable was important. This often involved cleanliness, even if it meant a quick wash of hands and face and wearing relatively clean clothing. The idea that everyone was so profoundly dirty that their only option was to douse themselves in strong perfume overlooks the efforts people made to present themselves acceptably. While bathing might not have been a daily ritual for most, it was performed periodically, and daily attention was paid to hands, face, and hair. The portrayal of medieval women drowning in perfume to hide an unbearable stench is more of a caricature than an accurate historical account. It stems from a modern projection of hygiene standards onto a past era. While odors were part of daily life and perfumes were used, their use was tied to cleanliness, social status, and an appreciation for pleasant aromas, not simply as an extreme last resort to mask extreme filth. Medieval women, like people in all eras, sought comfort, pleasantness, and social acceptance, and their use of scents reflected these desires in conjunction with their other hygiene practices. Number 6. Medieval women never bathed. The widely circulated misconception that medieval women, and indeed most people of the medieval period, never bathed is blatantly false. Historical records, archaeological findings, and contemporary art and literature provide ample evidence that bathing was a recognized and practiced activity, albeit with different frequencies and methods than in modern times. The idea of a uniformly unwashed population for centuries is a dramatic oversimplification of a diverse and dynamic historical period. Bathing was common across social classes, though access to facilities and the luxury of hot water varied significantly. For the wealthy, private bathing was a well-established practice. Castles and large manor houses often included dedicated bathing chambers, or portable wooden tubs would be set up in a private room. Water would be heated over a fire and carried to the tub. Servants would assist with the bathing process, which might include the use of soaps, fragrant herbs, or scented waters. The lords and ladies would bathe regularly, perhaps several times a week or even daily, depending on their personal preference and the availability of resources. Records from royal courts and noble households frequently mention expenses for heating bath water or purchasing bathing supplies. Public bathhouses were also a prominent feature of medieval urban life, particularly in the earlier medieval period and in southern Europe. These communal establishments offered facilities for both men and women, often with separate sections or specific times for each sex. People would gather not just to wash, but also to socialize. These bathhouses provided access to heated water and steam for those who could not afford private bathing facilities. They were social hubs, places where people could relax, conduct business, and enjoy a communal sense of cleanliness. While the popularity of public bathhouses declined in some regions after the Black Death due to fears of disease transmission through shared spaces, their existence for centuries before this demonstrates a societal acceptance and provision for public bathing. For the vast majority of the population who lived in rural areas or smaller towns, bathing might have been a less frequent but still deliberate event. In homes, a large wooden tub might be brought out and hot water heated over the hearth. Family members would take turns bathing in the same water, often starting with the cleanest person and progressing to others. This was a common practice, perhaps done weekly or bi-weekly. Even if a full-body immersion was not a daily routine, people practiced partial washing. Hands, faces, and feet were washed much more frequently, often daily, especially after working in fields or engaging in dusty crafts. Ewers and basins for hand washing were common household items. Rivers, lakes, and streams also served as natural bathing places, especially during warmer months. People would swim and wash in these natural bodies of water. Monasteries, known for their strict rules on hygiene and order, often had sophisticated plumbing systems that directed water to lavatories and sometimes even communal bathing areas for the monks and nuns. Their rules often included provisions for regular bathing and washing of garments, emphasizing cleanliness as part of a disciplined and pious life. Bathing was not solely for physical cleanliness, but also held ritual and medicinal significance. Before important events, such as weddings or religious festivals, people would often bathe as a form of purification. Medical texts sometimes recommended bathing as a therapeutic measure for various ailments, or as a way to maintain health by balancing the body's humors. The type of water, temperature, and added herbs were often specified for different conditions. The idea of medieval people never bathing is a myth likely perpetuated by later periods viewing the past through a lens of modern sanitation. While their practices and standards were different from ours, the act of washing and bathing was understood, practiced, and valued in medieval society. Medieval women, like men, engaged in bathing as part of their personal care, for social reasons, for health, and for spiritual purposes, demonstrating a far more nuanced approach to hygiene than the popular myth suggests.